Welcome to Recalculating Small Business. Like its award-winning book, Recalculating is dedicated to small business in America. Your hosts are Don Mazzella and Dan Perkins. Don Mazzella is the editor-in-chief of the Small Business Digest. Dan Perkins is a registered investment advisor with 43 years' experience in managing money.
Dan Perkins here, your co-host, along with Don Mazzella of Recalculating for Small Business. Our radio program is dedicated to you, helping the small business owners increase their profits. We draw our name from Recalculating, voted the best small business book of 2017 by the Independent Press. In this book, it features ways to grow your small business. Now, here's Don Mazzella.
Dan Perkins, my co-host, is on assignment today. When there is a regulatory mishap, people inside an enterprise look all over for the reasons. Beth Haddock is here to tell us more about why it happens, how it happens, and what you can do about it. Beth, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Beth, first, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be able to talk about this subject that's right now affecting an awful lot of companies.
Sure. I have been a chief ethics and compliance officer at different companies and corporations for 25 plus years. I started working on Capitol Hill. I'm a trained attorney. And then I really just felt as though I could make a bigger impact by going in-house at these companies and advising and guiding business as they grow. And that's what I've been doing.
And your company today, who do you work for, or is it your own company?
Well, recently I founded a company where I am giving governance and compliance advice to fintech companies. So those are financial technology companies, traditional financial services companies, as well as just some startups. And I help them set up their governance and compliance program. And I'm using that 25 plus years of experience as well as some of the practical tips that are in my book, Triple Bottom Line Compliance, where I advocate using behavioral economics to really not only have a good governance structure, but also to incentivize the behavior that all business leaders would like to see.
Well, that's a laudable goal. Many business leaders say they want it, and oftentimes say it more than they really want. Do you have a book on the subject?
I do. It's Triple Bottom Line Compliance: How to Deliver Impact, Productivity, and Protection. So that, that business person that wants all their employees to bring in revenues, the compliance program that I help design is aligned with bringing in revenues and doing it in the right way. So you can make profits and have good behavior.
Well, we're going to get into that. But to me, compliance, you have compliance of the government, compliance of various regulatory, not so much regulatory as people like accounting professional boards, etc., and you have state and local compliance and safety requirements. Do you talk on all three, or do you want to talk first or foremost about any of these?
Well, I do, as you sort of broke it down into the three silos of industry standards, laws, regulations, and rules, and then just good corporate governance if you're going to have investors in your small business or you're just looking to grow it. When I build a corporate compliance program, it hits all three. As an attorney and as one that really supports those in the financial services realm, we do spend a lot of time on industry standards, what are best practices, as well as what's the law. because a lot of times if you want to protect your company, you need to benchmark and know what others are doing in your industry. Because a lot of the laws, as you probably know, are very high level. Sometimes they're just broad principles, and when you get down to the practical nuts and bolts, you have to know what others in the industry are doing.
Well, that's a wide area, and I'd like to stick there. In my experience, this is a question I often ask myself and I ask others, is the willingness to comply greater or lesser than in years past?
I think it's the same. I think what ends up happening is prior to 2005, you had a lot of companies that didn't focus on internal controls as much because companies weren't as global, products and services weren't as sophisticated. There wasn't all of the complexities of having online business. So just more recently, with all of the complexities that come with running a business in 2018, you see more laws and regulations that are trying to put some guardrails around that business. But I generally believe that good people try and deliver results for their business. And a lot of times when you see non-compliance or you see unethical behavior, it's because good people rationalize what they're doing is okay. And I think those rationalizations aren't any more poignant today than they've been in the past.
That's a good answer. I'm in a small business. I've been in business. I'm going into my 5th year. And I suddenly realized that I'm not in compliance with the industry standards. Over time, I've let them slip. I come to you and I say, help me develop my compliance. How do you go about it?
It's a great question. Thank you. If you look at my book, Triple Bottom Line Compliance, you'll get a sense of my strategy. I'd say the first tranche is listen to the business person. Where do they want to be with their business? And sometimes that means if they don't know, it's a conversation. If they have a strategic business plan or even just a PowerPoint, you get a sense of current state of the business and future state of the business. Once you're able to do that, then you, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's super important to benchmark all the competitors and see where others are, and get a sense of the different challenges in the industry as well as the business for the current and the future state. And then you go about setting a plan. And that plan doesn't mean everything is the same priority. You risk rank it low, medium, or high based on the needs of the business, what the others are doing, what are the best practices in the industry, and then what are the regulatory requirements. You have a plan, and then you work shoulder to shoulder with your, in my case, it would be my clients, to help them get up to speed. It's a very common scenario you described.
Well, just recently, I read in the Wall Street Journal about a company that was pushing through quarter-ending sales to clients so that their quarter-ending, their sales overall looked good, and they've run into trouble. Is that the type of corporate or industry standards that you would look at and say to them, well, maybe you accept a lesser sales for better compliance?
I'd say it a little bit differently, which is yes, I would look at incentives. How are cash and non-cash compensation programs designed? But my goal would be to have the same amount of revenue, just have it be more like an annuity, more steady. So this way you don't cram it in at the end of the quarter, and it may not be sticky regardless. So if you change the incentives so this way you're getting the right clients, those that are going to be loyal, and you'll have longer term results. that would be the type of incentive plan that I would help one design. And the big multinational companies, if you look at Unilever, even I believe BlackRock, have talked about changing the way in which they report performance numbers to avoid this type of return pressure quarterly. But as you mentioned, private, smaller companies have the same pressure.
Well, in this case, it's turning around to, but what if the company itself is saying, I want to do it, yet the sales managers in this case are continue to push it because that's how they earn their bonuses. How do you reconcile the two?
Well, I think it's hard if on one hand you're saying you want to have good governance and good compliance, so this way you can protect your brand. And on the other hand, you're saying I want to have incentives that are high-pressure sales tactics, because generally if you have incentives for high-pressure sales tactics without making sure that the sales are bona fide sales within the confines of the law, or just sort of fair dealing with your customers, you really are going to end up with a compliance problem. And I do believe one can have very successful sales while treating their customers fairly. And I think of compliance as setting up incentives so you treat your customers fairly.
Well, there's a rather large pet company with many retail operations that I happen to know has been where I'm trying to frame it. Essentially, it encourages employees to push other products, and the employees felt so pushed by it that they were adding on items to the shopping order, and the company itself found itself with a great many returned items. How do you deal with something like that within the context of what you're saying?
Yeah, so sometimes, right, there's just big companies that, because they're either sloppy or they've grown too fast without the right infrastructure, that you have these practices that come up. They're just, let's just say it's because of sloppy practices and not intent. You know, the intent to add on products that customers did not order could be misrepresentation or fraud, right? You could be violating laws about consumer protection. And if that's the case, and it is from the top of the organization all the way down through middle management, I really do think that it's difficult to build a good compliance program around that type of leadership and that type of business model. But if it is growing pains, if it is just sloppy infrastructure because everyone is so excited about the success of the tech model, that is certainly something that that one can work through. And what you would start with would be the management, importantly the middle management, setting standards about saying we want a lot of sales. Everyone, let's agree, but how we get that, the means are just as important as the ends. And whether it's through training or messaging, that the outreach is continuous, so this way it is very clear that any kind of mistakes that happened in the past are not how the business wants to run and grow in the future.
Well, we're talking with Beth Haddock. Beth, how people can reach you, your website, and your book?
Yeah, so my book is Triple Bottom Line Compliance, How to Deliver Protection, Productivity, and Impact. My website is bethhaddock.com. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to give anyone guidance on how to really bolster their controls within their small business.
Well, Beth, I want to just go one more, then Wells Fargo has absolutely trashed its reputation for doing some of the things that we just discussed. How would you recommend that they could get back on the right track?
I don't know, obviously, the confidential ins and outs of the leadership there, but as one looks at the fact that it is more than one or two different incidents, you really do pause and wonder about the role of the board, the role of senior management, and the role of middle management, all the leaders of the organization. You probably have seen the same branding that I have, where Wells Fargo has taken out commercials to say they've been around for a very long time, but now it's a new company. So if it is a truly new company, I would love to see an assessment of all the incentives. Have it look a little bit more like Unilever and L'Oreal, where they have sales incentives. They're very successful companies, but they've gone through and they're looking for sustainable long-term results that aren't based on episodic, sort of short-term sales pressure tactics. So I'd look at management and I'd look at incentives, and then I would also look at what I call fudge factor thinking and see how engaged employees are. And I would try and have employees that self-report issues to make sure there are incentives and rewards there. So you have employees that are helping to maintain that new type of culture that is really operating very differently than the company that we've seen in the last 2 years.
Well, that's really great advice. Now, Beth, let's go a totally different direction. You walk into a company and the head of it says, "Beth, I'm totally open to you." How do you go about starting a process of instilling some of these critical things that you've discussed?
Yeah, so I do cover a lot of this in my book. That's awesome, right? You walk in, you know that the head of the business is looking for guidance. So they'll be the leader, and then as soon as they lead, others will follow. And then my role is to put the infrastructure in place and be there to give guidance along the way and make sure that that the compliance isn't a bolt-on. It's within a fabric of the organization, so people don't even know you have a strong compliance. It's just the way things work at that company. So one of the first things to do would be to make sure that there is that leadership, and the leadership would mean that you would need to start with an assessment, say a 90-day assessment of where are the highest enterprise risks within the organization. That can be because they're behind in the industry of the competitors that they want to be like, where they have a great governance and they're making really great profits and serving their clients. After an assessment of what are the weaknesses and what are the strengths, then you make sure that you have a project plan with a task force that includes all of the business leaders, not just the risk folks or the compliance people. You make sure the leaders within the business are leading the charge for the different types of change. So the change agent comes from the business as well as compliance. And then lastly, you hold compliance, legal risk, whatever they are within your organization, you hold them to the same business principles that you hold to the person that's responsible for marketing and sales. And you make sure that there's a good team, because as the business grows and changes, your infrastructure needs to evolve and constantly change. So this way it's along with the business and not sort of a bureaucratic bolt-on, really avoiding any kind of bureaucratic patterns.
That's really terrific. Are there any companies that you would like to cite as you feel have good governance or are leaders in the field in your experience?
Yeah, I do a lot with impact investing and ESG investing, and there are some organizations, back to your original point, there are some organizations that grade companies for delivering results and doing so with good governance. And there's lots of studies that show good governance does lead to returns over the longer term. And there's an organization called the UN Principles of Responsible Investing. And if you go there, there's over 200 companies that are signatories of, it's called the PRI. And if you look at those signatories, you'll see they are not perfect companies, but they are companies where leadership has said, we want to make returns and we want to do so responsibly. And as you probably are aware, when you look at the economic drivers of our economy in 2018, millennials, particularly as they age and have more disposable income, they're sort of the drivers of the demand of this, as well as others in the market who really want to be able to trust those that they buy goods and services from.
Oh, that's great. Well, let me ask you this question: when you look at companies as an outsider, what are some of the factors that you see that indicate to you that maybe they're in need of good governance?
Well, we're really fortunate, right? We have the internet. There's a wealth of knowledge there. So just by looking at the internet and looking at a company's website, you can see a lot about how they value, getting, I'll just call it responsible results instead of just results. So most recently with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was in front of Congress, and I took a look at the code of conduct and the different documents that were posted on Facebook's website. And I saw on their code of conduct, they may have changed it since the last time I looked, but as of the time that he testified and then about 30 days afterwards, their code of conduct still said that their duty was to themselves, and they did not list privacy as a law in which it was on their top priority list. So when I look at companies, I think you can see a lot by how transparent they are about what their priorities are and how they feel they are positioned as sort of a duty to their customers. And you'd be amazed at how simple it is just to find that on one's website. Obviously, the next layer after that, sometimes you are able to learn a lot simply by that and the transparency there. Then you do have to worry about window washing, right, or just sort of having window dressing. And then the next level would be when you talk to the people from that company, asking some very good due diligence questions. So to me, when I assess a company, it's about the transparency with their governance, and then it's how do they answer those due diligence questions about how engaged are their employees, how well do they listen to feedback from them, how aligned are they when it comes to incentives for sales, as we've been talking about.
Well, I just want to make it clear. Are you saying that Facebook hasn't put privacy as a priority, or are now putting it as a priority? I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
Well, if you look at Facebook.com and you go into their code of conduct that was drafted prior, yeah, it is not there. I do believe, as we have all seen, that now, because it's a repeat deficiency with some of the enforcement cases a few years ago, that there has been more and more of a priority being placed on privacy. There's a new California law. It won't go into effect until 2020, but it's akin to the protections in Europe. But my understanding is currently Facebook does not give you the protections if you're an American as you would have if you were European. And those European protections are what I'm really hopeful we'll all have as Americans.
Could not agree with you more. And I just wanted to be clear on that point because you're absolutely right. And sometimes when you do read these documents, you sit there and wonder, A, would they ever put them out there? And B, did they really realize what they're saying? You're absolutely right. It's a very interesting time. We have just a few minutes left. Beth, we're talking with Beth Haddock. Beth, your new book and how people could reach you.
Yeah, my book is Triple Bottom Line Compliance: How to Deliver Protection, Productivity, and Impact. And you can reach me at bethhaddock.com.
Well, we have just a couple of minutes left. What are the 2 or 3 things you would like to briefly tell small business listeners about in improving their corporate governance?
I would say there's 3 things. One, if they haven't had an outside, a third-party entity assess their governance and help them discover any kind of blind spots, they should do so. Having a fresh look, so this way you can uncover your blind spots, is really going to help your business go and protect you from something that is pretty crucial, particularly for small business owners. Second, if you don't have a strategic business plan, I do think you want to make sure that you have one and include your governance and compliance there. Because if you embed it within your business and you know what your current state is and what your future state is for your business, you have a better chance of making business decisions that are looking a little bit more long-term. And then I believe generally you're going to see business owners will make decisions that are using good business judgment and are good governance. And then third, if you are an organization that has customer complaints, or you're an organization where the industry has had issues with consumer protection, regulatory, or lawsuits, you should consider yourself when you do a risk assessment as really needing to do this sooner or later. Because if you yourself have had customer complaints, if there's litigation, or if there are regulatory actions, it really should be something that's on the top of your list to get this independent assessment.
Well, Beth Haddock, thank you so much for being with us. It's been illuminating. A link to your website will be on recalculating.biz tonight, where you can hear this and every other past and future Recalculating radio program. And you can also tell us via a short survey what types of guests you'd like to see in the future. Beth Haddock, thank you so much for being with us.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz with your featured book. I want to tell you about a recent interview I had with Bob Bethel, a turnaround specialist with lots of success in small business. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. He tells us of his life successes and failures that have made him and his clients so successful. Over the years, Bob has brought 77 companies back from the brink and changed them into thriving, profitable businesses. His energy is amazing, and at 74, he proves that you can still have a great deal to give others if you just try. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. One insight struck me was that most companies do not have a plan. The old Chinese proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there, is true today. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. This has been Dan Perkins with your Recalculating.biz featured book.
Marcus Lemonis, J.D. Powers, and John Scully, and 100 other presidents and experts contributed to Recalculating the book. Why did all these people agree to contribute to the book? I'm Don Mazzella, and I'm the editorial director of Small Business Digest. And for 20 years, we have been offering small business leaders information and data to increase profits. Recalculating the book was named the best small business book by the Independent Press Association. Whether you need help with marketing, staffing, finance, operations, technology, or many other subjects, they're all here in Recalculating the book. They're now available at Amazon at a reduced cost. We've also created the radio program Recalculating on recalculating.biz.
Welcome back to Recalculating, a program designed to help you to be successful. Now it's time for Money in Motion. Dan Perkins is our resident expert in making the money you earn work as hard as you do. Here is Dan Perkins.
Dan Perkins here for Recalculating for Small Business with your tip of the day. Should you belong to a local marketing network? One area of potential business is other small business owners through marketing networks. These groups usually meet once or twice a month for lunch and discussions. Sometimes the group will invite a guest speaker to talk about how they are building their brand. People in different businesses generally go and make up these groups. If you have a computer problem, perhaps one of the members of your group can fix your problem, or at least tell you about somebody they've used to fix their problems. Sometimes members of your group can use your product or services. So here's your Recalculating for Small Business tip of the day. Reach out and ask your fellow business friends if they belong to a marketing group. And if they do, tell them you'd like to go. Shop around and find a group or two that you like. You'll make new friends and maybe find new customers. This is Dan Perkins with your Recalculating Small Business tip of the day.
Dan Perkins is on assignment. Our next guest is Daniel Armanios, assistant professor in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. He's here to talk about how certifications need to be carefully sought, as too many may, if research is correct, actually harm a small business's chances for getting grants. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Don.
Well, let's start with a little bit of background on yourself before we do anything else.
Yeah, sure. So I come to these problems around entrepreneurship and public policy from a rather unconventional lens. So I come with training in mechanical engineering, so the sense of how to deal with applied sciences and fundamental science phenomena. But then also a few of my degrees are in the social sciences, namely around sociology. And so what got me interested in these problems was trying to understand how organizations have to coordinate or interact with each other and with firms to bring high-tech innovations into markets. And so that's what got me interested in these kind of challenges and how to help both governments and firms address those issues.
Wow. So, in effect, you're an academic who helps government and businesses get together?
That's the hope, yep.
Well, God knows we need that. Now, Daniel, I'm going to call you Dan if it's okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Dan, you're part of a study. Tell us what your study found, and in your own words, and if you get too highfalutin, I'll tell you.
No problem. So this is a study I did as an equal partnership with Lauren Lanahan, who's an assistant professor at the Lundquist School of Business at the University of Oregon. And what we were interested in is trying to understand whether it's always beneficial or useful to try to get certifications. And when we think of certifications, you can think of them as, for example, ISO 14001 certifications for environment, best place to work certifications, and so on. And one of the things we started noticing was that the prevailing view was that you want to get as many of these as possible, keep racking them up, and it's just a get richer process. And what these studies did not really address was the cost in getting those certifications, what was actually being certified, what is being signaled from this, and then who is actually the agency doing that. And what we found was, especially in the sciences, you often have multiple certification agencies that are trying to support high-tech innovations, and they're often certifying for different things. And so essentially the findings that we have from this paper is that if you continue going to the same certification body for various benefits, additional certifications, people may perceive this as a redundant signal. Why is that? Is because if you look at these industries where they have multiple bodies, if I keep going to the same body, then the VCs or other financiers that are thinking of these ventures are asking, well, why aren't you able to get certifications from these other bodies? And this is particularly the case we found with the Small Business Innovation Research Program, because the challenge there is that the federal agencies are interested in technical merit. So if you keep getting these grants from the federal government, you keep addressing this essentially the same signal, which is that I know how to do science. The challenge, though, if you're trying to go into a market, is you have to also show that you found the right market fit. And what we found is that those firms that also get state matches signal that they know how to fit the local economy or market in hopes of growing the technologies. And so the idea is that not all multiple certifications work. You need to have these certifications from a variety of agencies. And so that's essentially what we found. If you keep getting the same certification from the same agency, it's considered redundant, and even worse, it could even gender the perception that you can't get certifications from other agencies. But if you get certifications from, let's say, the federal government, one agency who looks at technical merit, and state governments who look at commercial merit, that combination actually is very powerful. And so the key implication is be aware of who you're getting certifications from and make sure that if you're getting more of them, they're from different sources.
That is a clear explanation of this as I've ever heard, and I thank you for that, and our audience does. But let me go back and ask a question. Well, let's define what certifications are. Now, for instance, to me, being certified as a woman-owned business now is almost a requirement, or being certified as a small business is a requirement. But are these the type of certifications, or are there other types that we should be also considering?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and that's a very important, essentially, boundary condition to what we're saying. You know, the certifications you're mentioning, such as I have to get incorporated, I have to be certified as a woman-owned business, a lot of these may not be voluntary. So think of, for example, certifications around, you know, if a firm is trying to validate a material they're using for testing, because there could be really dire consequences if the material is not tested correctly, you often are mandatorily obliged to get those certifications. Those are not the kind of certifications we're talking about here. We're thinking of more voluntary certifications. Certifications where the firm is willingly putting up information to get vetted by an agency, but they don't necessarily have to. So I think the closer analogous certification to what we're dealing with here is more like ISO 14001 certification for those firms that are trying to show they're trying to improve environmental management, and they're trying to get their components certified as high quality for environmental management systems. Those are voluntary. You don't have to get them, but if you do get them, they in theory give you that extra, what you can call like a stamp of approval, to say that what you're doing is reasonable and legitimate within the market you're trying to enter.
I'd like to explore a little more, because I think this is so important. When I first read about your study, I was somewhat confused. Again, and which is not too hard for me, but the idea is, you said ISO 2000, etc. For instance, material handling. There are three or four different certifications in material handling, 2 or 3. There might be 100 for all I know, but I happen to know 2 or 3. Is that the type of certification you're also talking about?
I think we're talking more about the former and not the latter. So it's closer to the ISO set of certifications, mainly because those are voluntary. You can choose to opt into those or not. But if you want to be a material science firm and you want to use a material for a certain application, you often have to get a mandatory check in terms of these certifications with material testing, because the reason for that is quite understandable in the sense that if this material fails, there's dire consequences for those involved. So there needs to be a quality assurance check or some kind of measure to ensure that you're meeting very stringent standards. You can also think about those kind of involuntary certifications. You can think around childcare. Any vulnerable population that's going to be in the hands of someone else has very stringent mandatory certifications to ensure that vulnerable population won't be hurt. What we're dealing with the SBIR program, which we call a certification, and ISO, is more voluntary. You can or cannot get into it, but that doesn't affect whether you can start a business in that space, continue doing your firm activities. So it's something that's not necessary for you to enter the market, but it's potentially useful if you're trying to signal how high quality you are or that you have good commercial or technical potential. So we're dealing with really voluntary certifications, those that are not necessary for you to enter the market, as opposed to the ones we've just discussed around child care or materials testing.
We're talking with Daniel Armanios, an assistant professor at the Department of Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. But Daniel, could you give us a couple of examples of other voluntary certifications that you're looking at? I'm still a little confused, and I apologize for that. I want to make sure our audience is aware.
Sure. So another example we mentioned in the paper is a couple. One, for example, is the Best Places to Work certifications. Some companies like to have that certification to show that they're a great place for employees, but you don't have to have that certification to run your business. Another example is in web security. So oftentimes you'll see some websites saying they have something called a Trust E certification. Those are firms that are willingly vetting their websites to this protocol to ensure that they have high security and privacy of the information you provide on those websites. Again, you don't need to apply for that certification, but some firms like to have it to signal that they have a higher quality, or at least a perception of higher quality, vis-a-vis those other websites that don't necessarily have those certifications.
Would the Better Business Bureau be considered another type of voluntary?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you voluntarily give information to get a credit rating, but there's many businesses you know out there that still operate without any kind of Better Business Bureau certification. So I would agree with you on that.
Well, an interesting point. With a Dun & Bradstreet, everybody asks for a Dun & Bradstreet. Mm-hmm. Is that considered a voluntary one? Or
the Dun & Bradstreet one's an interesting one, right? Because the idea is that you apply your information and you get a Dunn's ID. Now, if you're trying to apply or do your business activity in any circumstance, you may not need it. But interestingly enough, if you want to be a firm that tries to get government contracts or procurement, they have databases such as the SAM database where, as part of the requirement, you have to get one of these Dun & Bradstreet or Dunn's IDs. But that's, again, dependent on whether the firm wants to work with the government. If the firm doesn't necessarily want to work with the government, they may not need that Dun & Bradstreet kind of registration. So that's an interesting case where it really depends on what the firm wants to do and whether the supplier agency in which they want to interact with is requiring that certification.
Well, now, let's turn around. You say in your study that the greater the number of these voluntary ones, the lesser the chance of getting investments or venture capital. Why is that, in your opinion?
So it's interesting to see in that one thing we have to understand about these grants and why we like to use the lens of what we call certification or these kind of signals is that oftentimes entrepreneurs are much more focused about the money they're going to get with these grants. And what we find is that when VCs or other financiers are looking at these grants, they seem to look more at the signal. What are you telling me or revealing about your firm that I didn't know otherwise? So let's go through the process of SBIR. Let's say you get a phase 1 grant. Already you're telling the venture capitalist, this has promising technical merit. The federal government, who's proficient, at least the agencies that are doing this, like the National Science Foundation and others, are proficient at vetting the science. So once you get the phase one grant, you've already told the venture capitalist that, you have good science. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of these firms will then go for a phase two grant. The funny coincidence with this, though, is that if you need to get a phase two grant, besides the fact you're not telling the venture capitalist anything different, they already know you're good at the science. You ironically are showing how far away you are from commercialization, that you still need to figure out some kinks in your science to then get the product out to the market. So the irony is that if I have to get a phase two, you're actually revealing the same information, and possibly worse, you're also signaling that you're still very far away from commercial potential. The reason is that if you had commercial potential, you would get a state match or other kinds of programs that would show you have already figured out the market for this product. So it's an interesting, tricky challenge for the venture in that they need often more money to vet particularly very capital-intensive science, such as life sciences. But by doing so, you're also signaling that you're still very far away from getting to the market. And so possibly just getting the first one is better than actually getting the second one, for example.
That's very, very interesting. What would, in your research, what is the ideal number of certifications?
I think what we found, the most ideal case, and again, there's different numbers, but I think the main one would be that you get a phase one certification. You happen to be in a state like North Carolina that has a state match, and once you get the state match, you're then much more likely to get venture capital financing. So if you wanted to be very idealized about it, two, and those two cannot be a phase one and a phase two, it should be a phase one grant followed by a state match. And we looked at the case of getting both phase one and phase two and phase one and state match, and still having a phase one with a state match seems to be the best. So if I had to give a more general kind of proposition around this, you want to get probably the number of certifications that are equal to the number of different agencies you have involved. For sciences, you need one to give you technical merit, one to give you commercial merit, then you would want two. Right? If there's other things you need to get signals on that are different than that, maybe you need three or four. But in this context, we typically find two, and from different agencies, not the same.
We're talking with Daniel Armanios. He's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. But I would like you to repeat that, because that was one of the most important statements we've had in this program in a long time. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah, sure. So the punchline is sometimes less is more. And so what you would want to get ideally in this context is that you want two certifications, one from a federal agency that's doing the Small Business Innovation Research Program, like a phase one grant. And then what you would like that to follow on with is another kind of certification that reveals your commercial merit. In this case, it's the state match program that some states have and that you can get when you apply for a phase one grant.
That is absolutely fabulous information. Daniel Armanios, he is assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University. What made you decide to do this survey?
So this is funny. So my original work around this approach actually was studying China, surprisingly enough. And so what I was interested in China was I was trying to understand how does a country that was only, in 1995, 9% of the S&T capacity, or science and technology capacity of the U.S., reach to near parity, at this point almost 93% of the capacity of the United States. And the prevailing view of a lot of scholars was that it's something about the national government. Funny enough, in China, it was very much based on the local government, and they have a similar program like this known as the InnoFund, where you can get money at the central government level, the provincial, and even the city level. So I was doing this work, and I happened to meet Lauren at one of our conferences who was doing very similar work at the local government in the U.S., and I thought this is a potentially interesting idea to see whether we see the same thing with other federalist systems like we have in the United States. And so I actually, funny enough, came from this through my work in an emerging economy like China. And so I was curious whether this, also works in other kinds of countries like the United States who have a similar kind of decentralized structure between national government and local, irrespective, obviously, of the political and ideological differences.
It's absolutely fascinating work. You know, here in New Jersey, we don't have any state grants like you mentioned. Is there equivalent programs like enterprise zones or things like that? I mean, we know the North Carolina program is one of the best, but as far as I know, there's nothing even remotely to that. And you don't consider there are programs, for instance, for women-owned businesses. Is that considered such an identification?
Yeah, you're right, Don. I think we in this context we only study the state match program just because it allowed us to more rigorously test our ideas. But if you take the more abstract concept, which is if you're getting an original certification that tells you about your technical qualities, you want to look for other certifications that can also reveal your commercial potential or the fact that you've recognized the market for your technology. Now, in this case, it's state match, but I could plausibly see other kinds of systems such as enterprise credit systems that often happen in different states, whether it's hub zone or technology parks sponsored by governments. These all could then, depending on the financiers involved, could be an adequate signal to say, look, you're actually reaching something to a market. Some view accelerator programs depending on who the funder is. Some look at science parks. All of these kind of things would be, the kind of stamp of approval you'd want to show your commercial potential for reaching a market. And so, yes, we talk about the state match here, but if you abstract it to its more general point, which is you want to be able in the sciences show your technical merit, but also your commercial merit, there's a whole series or slew of different government programs in each of the listeners' respective states that may fit that bill.
Well, Dan, on my other program, Food and Wine Insider, we had a woman who developed her products out of the LSU food lab. Would that be considered such a program?
So it, in my view, it depends on who is backing that food lab. So, for example, if this is, let's say, typical to what I think of like a science park, if, let's say, the government is saying we're putting in money to this because we want to identify promising ventures that could help, in this case for this LSU, the state of, let's say, Louisiana, regarding bringing out horticulture or other food and wine products, and they've had prior successes where they've had things come out of that lab that did really well, then I would agree with you. The food lab could be one of these certifications that signal commercial merit. But if it's more analogous to a typical research lab, you would say that's in any university, then it may give you some sense of technical quality, but it may not necessarily reveal whether this product has entered or has an opportunity to reach a commercial setting. So what happens is oftentimes, interestingly enough, a lot of sciences that come out of university-based labs, they actually will apply for an SBIR program first to show that they have good technical merit, and their hope is with that can convince some financiers that are more commercially oriented, like angel funds, venture capitalists, maybe some state commercialization assistant programs, to then further on follow on with funding. And so it just depends on what is the organization you're within, if it's more analogous to a research lab in a university or more analogous to a well-respected science park, accelerator, and the like.
Oh, it's a food accelerator for foods. But the ironic part, she said, I did it so that when I came out, my husband would fund it. So anyway, Dan Armanios, we're coming almost to the end of our time together, which is unfortunate. You have brought some really interesting knowledge and valuable knowledge to our audience. How people can reach you, a website that we can use so they can reach you and see the study for themselves?
Yeah, so the study is available. It's forthcoming in the journal Organization Science. So if any of your listeners have access to that journal, they can read it. If not, they can go to my website at the Engineering and Public Policy website to reach out to me, or they can simply email me at darmanios@cmu.edu.
Okay. Will you spell out your name?
My email is D as in dog, A as in apple, R as in rose, M as in Mary, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, I as in igloo, O as in orange, S as in Stan, at cmu.edu.
Thank you so much, Dan. It has been a pleasure. A link to your website will be on recalculating.biz tonight, where you can hear this and every other recalculating program, and you can tell us guests you might like to hear. Dan Armanios, thank you so much for being with us and for bringing a lot, like I have to say, outstanding information. Thank you.
My pleasure, Don. Thanks for having me.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees, improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com. Welcome back to Recalculating, the program dedicated to American small business. Now it's time to bring together our two experts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella, as they discuss things that are happening now that are affecting your business success.
You know, Dan, before we go any further, I want our audience to know about your new runaway hit book on Alzheimer's disease and how it affects teenagers. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, Don, thank you. The book is called Why Can't Grammy Remember Me? It's a book written primarily for children ages 9 to 12, but really needs to be read by the entire family. And what I try to do is I try to take the subject matter of dementia and the challenges to a different level in the form of a mystery story with my two little detectives, two little girls, Hudson and Charlotte. And it really creates a breakthrough opportunity for small children and parents and families to begin to understand the problem with dementia. See, Don, the real challenge is that the children are the forgotten people. Mom and Dad spend so much time working to try and take care of Mom and Dad, they don't take the time to explain to the children what's going on in Grandma or Grandpa's brain. So you can buy it at Amazon.com, or you can order it through your local bookstore, or any online bookstore besides Amazon has it available. Why Can't Grammy Remember Me? Illustrations are spectacular. A story by Dan Perkins.
Your runaway bestseller, new book.
Why Can't Grammy Remember Me by Dan Perkins. Dan Perkins here for Songs and Stories for Soldiers with your Veterans Tip of the Day. Did you know that the suicide rate for women vets is 12 times that of their sisters in civilian life? Did you know that 1 in 4 women vets feel uncomfortable about talking to people about their mental health issues? Did you know almost 600,000 women vets in America are suffering from PTSD? It's time to help. It's time for all of us to encourage our sisters, mothers, and wives to get help by contacting their local VA hospital, clinic, or community-based health care center. So if you know a woman vet that is suffering, go to va.gov and find their nearest VA facility. This has been Dan Perkins of Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us with your Veterans Tip of the Day. We've been asked recently by a number of people, how can they listen to past shows? And if you go to recalculating.biz, you'll find a link to iHeartRadio, which will allow you to go back and listen to shows that you didn't get a chance to finish or never heard. So we encourage you to go there, recalculating.biz.
Thank you for joining us on Recalculating. We hope the information you received on today's episode was helpful to you in starting and growing your business. Please go to our website, recalculating.biz, to contact us, to listen to past shows, and see special offers. Until next time, remember, if you grow, we grow. Join us next week for more helpful ideas to make your business a great success. Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.